Hi folks, welcome back to my channel. You might remember a couple of videos ago I did an unboxing and first light video on the Askar FMA135 Astrograph, and I was very pleased with the performance of the little mini telescope, but my mount basically let me down and I was only getting 30 odd second exposures, whereas I would have expected at least a minute exposures off of my mount, which was the Star Adventurer mount. And so what I'm going to do today is try and double check that my setup was right and that my polar alignment's correct, and see if I can get any better than 30 second exposures out of it. So yeah, perhaps you can join me and see how I get on. My name's John and I make videos on camping, walking and astronomy. If you like what you see in this video, then please check my channel out, as you may find others that interest you there. But in the meantime, let's crack on with this video. So I was quite pleased with the image that I took using the Askar little mini telescope. One of the butterfly nebula around the star Seda I was quite pleased with. I saw different colours in the stars, and I brought out the nebulosity. Even though I'd only done like a few minutes exposures, I still managed to get a result out of it. But what I was disappointed with was the star trailing that I was getting after 30 second exposures. So yeah, today what I'm going to try and do is take a picture of the North America Nebula, which isn't too far away from the Butterfly Nebula, and also try and get a target that I've never managed to get before because my field of view has simply been wrong, and it's the Cygnus loop in the constellation Cygnus, obviously, and this is a supernova remnant. And in the past I've photographed sections of it. It's otherwise known as the Veil Nebula, and I've imaged the Western Veil Nebula and the Eastern Veil Nebula, and they make absolutely fantastic targets, really lovely objects, but I've never got the whole complex together. And this Askar FMA135 has a sufficiently wide field of view that I should have no trouble getting the whole complex. So at the moment we're in the middle of a mega heat wave here in the UK, for us anyway, and temperatures today somewhere in the Midlands I think hit something like 40 point something degrees, which is like unheard of for us. Down here in the southeast of England it was 39 point something today, and this basically means that I've got no chance of getting to sleep tonight. It's one of the reasons I'm doing a bit of astro tonight. I'm also going to sleep in the garden. I've got my sleeping bag set out, so I've at least got half a chance of getting to sleep. But the sky's beautifully clear and there's not much of a moon around. So other than the fact that it's dead hot, the conditions are actually quite good for astrophotography. The heat will cause problems because the camera sensor will get hot and that will introduce noise, but I'm just going to take my chances and see how I get on. Hi folks, well it's still absolutely blindingly hot here. I did manage to get some sleep last night, but it was about 2 o'clock before I managed to get to sleep. but still, at least that was something. So anyway, I've I took my images yesterday, and I took about 40 minutes worth of exposures on the North American Nebula and the Cygnus Loop, or the Veil Nebula Complex. Processed them today, and to be honest, I was a bit disappointed. The actual Askar FMA135 lens, or Astrograph, did a good job, but my mount definitely isn't playing ball, and I was only able to get 30-35 second exposures. Now on the North American Nebula, that's not such a big deal because it's quite a bright big object, and the image that came out of that I'm reasonably pleased with, although it doesn't bear pixel peeping, because you soon start seeing the little dots of stars actually looking like lines when you blow it up. The Veil Nebula Complex was a bit of a different story. 30-second exposures really aren't enough to pick the object up, and after stacking 40 minutes worth of images, you could only just see one part of the complex in the image, and in order to get any of it out, I had to remove all the stars, process the remaining image to within an inch of its life, and then put some stars back in again. And the image itself, had I had miles more exposure time and longer exposures, I would have been quite pleased with. As it is, it's the only picture I've got of that complex as a whole, so I have to look at the positive there. But yeah, I'm sort of quite worried about my mount, and initially I thought that it was the actual head itself. But what I think's causing the problem is this bit here, which is the wedge, the equatorial wedge. It's not fantastic quality. That's the first thing, and it kind of never was. And there seems to be a lot of backlash in it now since it took a bit of a knock. I mean, there was always some backlash, but it seems to be a lot worse. So what I think is happening is I'm setting up my polar alignment, and it's simply not holding it. So I think that this thing took something of a knock, and since then it's got a lot of backlash in it. Now this, I think, is about £60 to replace, but what I'm going to do is have a little look at the William Optics wedge, because there are some sort of known issues with this, in that it's not the greatest of quality. William Optics have brought out basically a much better upgraded wedge, so I'm going to have a little look at that. The Star Adventurer wedge is about 60 something £. The William Optics one is about £180, so it's a not inconsiderable investment. But I'm going to do a little bit of research for the rest of the week now, and probably end up ordering a William Optics one, although I could order this instead, and repeat the whole exercise in about another week or so before the moon starts to get a bit full. So yeah, I'll bring you back in about a week's time. Hi, well, it's a few days later, and I cracked and got the William Optics latitude base, or wedge, in the end. I watched a few videos, primary one being one done by a guy called Peter Zelinka, who tends to specialise in using star trackers. He had initially at least, the Ioptron Sky Guider Pro, which had a very basic equatorial wedge here, and the William Optics was a huge upgrade on that. The wedge for the Star Adventurer is an upgrade on the Ioptron one, but still isn't perfect, and as I say, I damaged mine. So yeah, in the end I cracked and bought the William Optics one. 180 odd pound, as I say. I think mine came from First Light Optics, but the prices seem to be the same regardless of where you go for it. The wedge itself is significantly chunkier than the Star Adventurer wedge. It appears to be made out of machined alloy. It's an awful lot heavier than the Skywatcher one, which might be an issue if you're planning on manually hauling this thing off somewhere. It's substantially more solid, I must say. The threads on the adjusters are much finer. There doesn't appear to be any backlash in it. So yeah, so I kind of put it all together, and my idea tonight is to go out and see what exposure length I can get using initially a DSLR camera with a 24mm lens, and then with the Askar FMA135 Astrograph little telescope. Previously I've been getting quite long exposures, 3 minutes, 4 minute exposures with a DSLR, and that's gone down the pan down to around a minute or a minute and a half. And with a mini scope I'd expect to get at least a minute exposure length, but I was only getting 30 seconds. So tonight I'm hoping to get around 4 minute exposure before star trailing using a DSLR, and minimum of 1 minute and ideally 2 minutes with my Askar FMA. I'm not planning on actually imaging using that sort of exposure time, simply because my pictures will be completely washed out. I just want to take a few at that exposure length just to check that I'm not getting bad star trailing, and then I'm going to drop it back to more sensible numbers like 2 minutes or so, where I'll actually be able to see some detail in the individual shots. So tonight I'm going to take a wide field shot above my roof, and I'm going to focus on the body end of Cygnus the Swan, missing the neck bit out, and include in the picture part of the constellation Cepheus. And the reason I want to do that is there's a very nice star in Cepheus called the Garnet Star. It's a kind of red supergiant, I think, that I want to try and pick up and see how reddy orangey it comes out. And right next to that is a nebula called the Elephant's Trunk Nebula. The nebula itself, the Elephant's Trunk bit, is a tiny part of a large area of nebulosity, and I'm not expecting to actually get much of the Elephant's Trunk detail wise, if you like, because my focal length using the Askar FMA135 is simply too short. I'm not going to have the magnification, but I want the whole of the area of nebulosity plus the Garnet Star within my image, and hopefully just pick up a tiny little bit of the little Elephant's Trunk Nebula itself. So the forecast for tonight is for it to be completely clear. Moon's beginning to sort of make an appearance again, but not too bad. So yeah, what I'm going to do is get out tonight, take those shots and bring you back, and hopefully I've solved my problem. So it's actually now about a week later, and the reason for that is I decided to split the exercise into two. So I had one evening doing a very wide field shot using a DSLR and a 24mm lens, and another evening where I used the Askar FMA135 on my camera and did a closer up view. And I'm pleased to report that my problem seemed to have gone away. But the best news actually overall was I happened to look up on the second night that I was out, and I thought I saw some high cloud just in the area that I was trying to image, kind of just to the left of Cygnus. And when I looked and I followed this thin high cloud along, I realised that it was in a band, and then I suddenly realised that I was actually seeing the Milky Way. and this is the first time I've managed to see the Milky Way from my back garden ever, I would say. Normally if I do get to see it, I have to go to a dark sky site. So I was absolutely chuffed to bits, regardless of the astrophotography that I was doing. So I'm not going to be able to help myself now. Every time I go out, I'm going to be going up having a little look. Anyway, as far as the William Optics wedge went, yeah, it works brilliantly well. It's extremely easy to do precise polar alignment with it. Polar alignments could never be described as a pleasure, but this was as close as it could get. Yeah, I think the fine threads on the adjuster screws means that it's easy to get a precise adjustment, and it's absolutely rock solid as well once you've set it. What I found was particular problems usually occur when you set your polar alignment up and then you add your counterweight bar and telescope or camera and heavy lens, and then that messes your polar alignment up. And what I found was that I set the polar alignment, I added my counterweight bar with the camera and the FMA, the Askar FMA Astrograph. Polar alignment was still exactly right. I then moved the whole setup to point to my target. Polar alignment was still exactly where I left it. So it does appear that the William Optics wedge is absolutely rock solid. And the net result of this was that when I was doing the wide field shots using the camera and 24mm lens, I got exposure times of up to 4 minutes with no star trailing. And in fact, I couldn't increase the exposure time anymore just because the whole image was complete white after that. So I couldn't actually pick stars out. So what I did with that was drop the exposure time back to 2 minutes so it wasn't a completely washed out picture. Set the f-stop to f4, so I stopped the lens down a few stops, and then I could at least sort of make out some detail in each individual sub that I was taking. And in the end I took about 40 minutes worth of 2-minute exposures. And I was very pleased with the result, I must say. You could see different colours in the stars, which is always nice. There's reds, blues, whites, that sort of thing. The naked eye stars were really stood out in the image. So the main stars that I was had got in Cygnus, so Deneb, Seda, and the 2 bits of the wing that I can see with my naked eye stood out, and the primary stars in Cepheus also stood out. What appeared in the picture, I still got the nebulosity, the North America nebula, the Butterfly Nebula, and a very wide field view of the nebulosity next to the Garnet Star, and the Garnet Star came out nice and orange as well. So yeah, I was dead pleased with that. Then high cloud, proper high cloud, did come over. That's what curtailed that night's exercise. So I couldn't then switch out and use the Askar FMA135 on my camera. I had to call it quits for that day, and I came back a few days later. So as time went on, the moon was gradually getting fuller and fuller, so I was quite keen to get out and get the second half of my test done. I think when I went out, the moon was probably just over half full. So it was still okay, and it was in a different part of the sky, so I was able to image okay. And this time round, I once again repeated the exercise of gradually increasing my exposure time. And bear in mind, I got 30 seconds beforehand, before I bought the William Optics wedge. And this time round, I got 3 minutes without star trailing, and again the image became washed out after that, so I couldn't increase it anymore. So what I did then was cut the exposure time back to 2 minutes, and then I had a decent image to look at, and I took an hour's worth of 2 minute exposures. The garnet star came out really nicely. I had a little bit of a game initially trying to find the garnet star and the associated nebulosity. I was actually pointing at the wrong star for a while and was trying to look at star patterns, trying to figure out whether I'd got the right star. And in the end I had to wait until something like 11:30 before the garnet star became visible to me, and I realised I was like a little bit off. Luckily I hadn't wasted too much time, and I wasn't thinking I was in the right spot. I had my suspicions. So from about 11:30 I was able to take my hour's worth of images, and it was kind of around then that I looked up and saw the Milky Way stretching over me. I knew at this point that I definitely got the right field of view through my scope and on my camera, so I was extremely happy at that point. When I processed the image, the nebulosity was clearly visible. The elephant's trunk, well, you could see it. It's a very small feature within this large area of nebulosity, and nothing like the detail that you'd get with a longer focal length scope. But I was just pleased to get it in this instance. Yeah, so overall I was sort of very happy. All of the credit for the long exposures can't really go for the William Optics wedge. It's the fact that I had a wedge with not huge backlash anymore. And remember, my Star Adventurer wedge basically took a knock and I think got damaged, and that was the real problem. But I kind of cut straight to the chase and used the William Optics wedge in order to make sure I got a nice rock solid foundation, and I'm very pleased with it at the end of the day. So yeah, I'm going to put the picture up now of the garnet star and its associated nebulosity, and yeah, I hope you like it, and take care. I'll see you again next time. Cheerio.